Hello, this is Patricia Martin, and welcome to Jung in the World, a podcast of Jungian anthology produced by the Jung Institute of Chicago. With us today is Murray Stein. He is one of the most prominent Jungian scholars in the world, and he is the training and supervising analyst at the International School of Analytical Psychology in Zurich. He has been the president of the International Association for Analytical Psychology, and he is the author of several top-selling books: Jung's Map of the Soul, Minding the Self, Outside, Inside, and All Around, and many other books and articles. 4 volumes of his collected writings have been published to date, and 2 more are currently in preparation. He is also the president of the Mercurius Prize Committee. It's an organization that honors the work of filmmakers who keep alive the theories of Carl Jung. We are especially honored by the opportunity to interview Murray Stein on the occasion of his new book, The Mystery of Transformation, but also because he was the first president of the Chicago Society of Jungian Analysts, and he played an active role in the founding of our institute, the Jung Institute of Chicago, from where this is coming. He lives in Switzerland and has a private practice in Zurich. Welcome, Murray Stein.
Thank you so much, Patricia. My pleasure to be here with you.
I so thoroughly enjoyed reading your new book, The Mystery of Transformation. What a big topic. And cheers to you for taking it on. I as I was reading it, I thought to myself, you know, we can say when we look back on our lives, boy, why did I reach that turning point? And why did I take the path I took? You know, some people just say, well, something happened, and they can't quite put their finger on it, you know, unless they've done a lot of analysis and depth psychology. But suddenly it seems that the secure boundaries of our lives, the guardrails, the work, the patterns, the roles we play, they used to define us, and then they start to feel stifling. What's going on there? Why do we feel the impulse to take the journey of transformation?
Well, because you've outgrown them. It's a little bit like wearing a suit of clothes when you're a teenager, and you have growth spurts. And at one point, they no longer fit you. The sleeves are too short or they're too tight. And so that happens in life. You know, people outgrow previous, you could say, persona constellations that have served them well for a period of time, but they no longer fit their needs and their emerging potentials. So this is an experience that many people have at different stages of their lives, where they outgrow one identity and need to find another formulation for themselves, another way of expressing themselves in the world, or being themselves. And one of the first books I wrote, which was delivered as a series of lectures at the Jung Center in Evanston at that time, this was in the 1980s, late 70s, 80s, became my first book, In MidLife, in which I considered what happens at midlife, in this midlife transition or midlife transformation. And that's pretty much what I came up with, based on my experience with some clients at that time, and looking at Jung's life. Jung went through a huge change and transformation experience at midlife when he broke away from Freud and he entered his confrontation with the unconscious, and then emerged from that. So this, what we call transformation, is really a kind of reformulation of attitudes toward life, views of yourself, your identity, how you are with other people, what you want to do with the rest of your life, your basic values. And these tend to evolve in the course of your life. You grow.
So this is fascinating, this phrase you just used. We have emerging potential. And is that to say that not only as we grow do our clothes get too tight for us because we're growing, but
Mhm.
also that there is a different sense of potentiality that waits for us, and we have to go find out what that is. Is that part of the dynamic?
Um, I like that word potential. The concept is that we are born with a lot of potentials, and Jung called that the self. The self is a potential personality that you come into the world with. When you're born, you haven't actualized very much. Jungians sometimes use the acorn theory. You're like a seed that grows into a tree. But if you cut open the seed and look at it, you don't see a little tree inside. You see germ seed. And that germ seed is potential for what the tree will become. And human beings are like that. We come into the world with a self. Michael Fordham has written about this. He was a prominent Jungian analyst in England. And we don't come with what is sometimes called tabula rasa, just a blank slate that is then impressed by influences and input and introjection. We come with substance, and we interact with the world. And so even the baby is interacting with its mother, and babies are different. If a mother has 3 or 4 babies, she'll see a difference in how they respond to her very early on. Some are more shy and introverted, some are more outgoing and extroverted. And so this potential that we come into the world with takes time to emerge. Some of it emerges quite early. Your brain develops in your early years. Your frontal lobes come online after a certain age, and as an adolescent, your body goes through a metamorphosis and changes. And so the physical changes that we see in a person taking place over a lifetime correspond also to psychological changes. A personality emerges in the course of time, and we call that transformation. And what you finally become in the course of your life is a combination of what you have brought into life, potentially, and how the world around you has reacted to it, or what has happened to you in the social and physical world. And so that also makes a great difference in how we eventually develop, how we're related to by our parents, by our mother initially, by others, by our society, schools, and then accidents that happen to us, traumas that happen to us. All of these have an effect on our development, but we're constantly interacting with whatever is coming to us from around us. And so we're a combination of outside, inside, and all around, as I wrote about. The boundaries between outside and inside aren't so clear. You grow up in a certain culture, you become a part of that culture. So the culture is outside of you, but it's also inside of you. And if you go to a different culture, you will get a glimpse of how that culture has formed you. If you grew up in America and you come over here to Switzerland or live in Europe, you'll see that you've been Americanized. You are American. There's something in you that you could say is American culture that's different from Swiss culture or French culture. So that outside and inside are very mixed together. But as psychologists, we tend to look for what, as psychotherapists, and particularly looking at individuation as potential growth and future development, we look at what is there that's available that hasn't been fully developed yet, but if brought into the picture, might make quite a difference in a person's life and their attitudes and their their work situations, their relationships. And we try to bring out as much of that potential as is possible. That's the goal of therapy, to facilitate what we call the individuation process, this movement toward wholeness, which is the development of the full personality.
You know, when you said the movement toward wholeness, it reminded me that I was away on retreat this past week, and I read your book, and I also picked up an old book of Barbara Hanna's on moving toward wholeness, or striving toward wholeness. Sorry, striving toward wholeness. Yes, and
Yeah.
she talks about this journey of transformation when we take it on somewhat consciously, that it can be work. And Carl Jung thought it was work. This, right? In other words, it's not just, you know, sunbeams and rainbows and you suddenly wake up and feel great because you're tuned into something new about yourself. And so I was curious if you could talk about what it takes from a person. What kind of traits have you seen over the years of working as an analyst? What does it take to go through a major transformation and come out the other end as a more whole person?
Well, it's a very difficult question. I think it takes a type of serious commitment to the process. Now, most people who come into Jungian analysis as such are already fairly interested in and committed to trying to engage in development and individuation. But a lot of people who come into psychotherapy and also end up visiting Jungian Analysts by accident don't know anything about the individuation process, and they just want some relief from their suffering. People come into psychotherapy because they're having a hard time with something. It might be a relationship, a loss, a conflict, a neurosis, and they would like to have some insight, but mostly relief from their acute suffering. And that can be delivered fairly quickly and easily, but with psychotherapy of most any kind. But then that relief is just the beginning of a possible, much deeper, life-changing engagement with oneself. And that's where the real work starts. The relief comes quite easily. It's quite superficial. You feel a little better having talked about your problems with somebody who cares about you and understands and can make a few comments and interpretations, and you sort of get on top of it and feel more energy. But if the issue is deeper than that, then of course relief is not so much the issue as really deep understanding. How did I get myself into a situation like this, or how can I get out of this pit that I've fallen into? And what a Jungian will do typically is not try to get people out of the pit so quickly as experience what's in the pit. Because the pit is also a part of your life experience. So the hard work in analysis, I find, is dealing with the pit. The pit. That is what Jung called the shadow. The shadow is the darkness. The shadow is the part of life that we don't want to look at or don't want to face. It's either something in ourselves that we don't like, or some things that have happened to us that are very painful and we want to keep in the closet. Traumatic experiences, losses, insults to our self-esteem, and to look at these carefully and to analyze them, as we say, and to take responsibility for the part of the situation that we can take responsibility for, is often a very challenging and painful and difficult piece of work. And so if people just want quick relief, they aren't going to go there for very long. They'll jump out and find a good hobby to pursue and go on their way. But people who really want to deal with themselves and with the issues will stay for the longer work. And that can be, hard work. It can be painful. It can be, but it's not only painful, because in that dark pit, you're also going to find some light. You're going to find treasures down there as you dig around. You're going to find unrealized life potentials in that pit. And so Jungians are generally optimistic about going into the darkness and staying there for a period of time and engaging the darkness in oneself and the depression and the sadness and the suffering, because it's a part of growth. Jung felt that you couldn't really grow, psychologically speaking, without suffering. It's a strange concept for most people, because who wants to suffer?
Right. We all want transformation. You know, it's like that joke, oh yeah, I believe in change. You go first. Right.
In my book, I write about Dante. I got fascinated with Dante a couple of years ago, because his 700th anniversary of his death was being celebrated in 21. And I was asked to give a lecture in Italy in honor of Dante. So I hadn't paid that much attention to the Divine Comedy, but I really got into it. And one of the chapters in my book is about Dante's journey to transformation. And Dante would have never become the great poet he did and write the Divine Comedy if he had not suffered excruciating pain by being exiled from his native Florence. He lost everything. On pain of death, he could not return to Florence. His party, the Guelphs or the Ghibellines, whichever one it was, I forget now at the moment, but there was a political conflict. He was on the wrong side. They took away all his property. They threw him out of the city. He could never return, and he lived the last 20 years of his life in exile. And that's when he wrote the Divine Comedy. Now, he would have probably been a notable poet anyway, because he was a romance poet and was fairly well known. But he would have gotten lost in politics and governing and administration and who knows what, had he not been forced into exile and suffer the terrible pathos of living in other people's houses, eating their bread, as he says, separated from his family. So the suffering made him into the great person that he became, not only as a poet, but as a kind of prophet and visionary. He had amazing inner experiences on his journey into the darkness of first the inferno and then purgatory and all the suffering that he witnessed and participated in. All of that was a part of his transformation into the great visionary prophet that he became. So Jung had the same experience at MidLife, and he created the Red Book out of his experience. And Jung became a Jungian because of his suffering. If he'd stayed with Freud, he could have had a comfortable life. He was wealthy. He could have been a notable psychiatrist, taught at the university, had a nice life, but he would never have become Jung had he not suffered. So suffering isn't a bad thing. Depression isn't a bad thing. Falling into the hole isn't a bad thing. It's what you do with it and what comes out of it.
And how we
That's
decide that we're going to
yeah,
pursue the path to get the elixir, to get the treasure.
that's right.
Because there is treasure. You know, when I interview people who have gone through a major set of transformations, you know, life altering changes, they've changed their career, they've changed, you know, where they live, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But they can profoundly say that they are different as the result of this transformation. They all feel a similar enthusiasm for what they learned out of the transition that now
Yeah.
guides their lives. Right?
I think gratitude is the key. You know that if you look at Jung's experience, once he got through it, and it took quite some years, but and then he had the experiences of the mandala and the light and the Liverpool dream. I think what he felt more than anything was gratitude that he'd been able to complete that journey. But as painful and difficult as it was for him, that it made his life meaningful. So I look for gratitude to people who go through the process and find their way to the other side of the transformation, to become themselves more fully, and to bring out these potentials that would have never been realized without the journey.
The Liverpool dream, it's referenced so many times, right? By Jungian scholars and Jung himself throughout his collected works. It makes me want to go there to the idea of dreams. And, you know, dreams are spoken to us. They reveal symbols and archetypes, metaphors. They're never really quite straightforward, especially when we're undergoing a transformation. But I think what struck me in your book is you coined the phrase "big dreams," and I think that was Jung's phrase for it. Some dreams are like the Liverpool dream; they're big and they're different, and they offer a different quality of guidance. And I just wondered if we could talk about that for a bit.
Yeah. Well, in my book In MidLife, I quote the dream of a woman in her midlife experience in her 30s. That was a dream of immense transformation. It was a death and rebirth dream, like I'd never seen before in my life at that point, but I was very young. I was in my 30s also. But to this day, it still strikes me as a magnificent depiction of a metamorphosis, a transformation process that was shown in the dream. Now, this dream came to her, and she didn't have any idea what the dream meant. She'd read a little bit of Jung. She was in some Jungian circles. But it took the next 20, 30 years to realize what that dream meant. So sometimes you have these big dreams that come to you, and all you can do is wonder, what does this hold in store for me? And keep it in the back of your mind and look back on it from some years distant, and you will see, wow, that really was an augury. That was a forecast of what was potentially developing within the depths of the unconscious. It's like the unconscious knows where it's going. You don't know. But there is a kind of wisdom that Jung discovered in the unconscious, which is different from Freud's idea of the unconscious, incidentally, which was more or less, you know, the shadow and the id, the instincts, our instinctual life, which is also there. But Jung discovered another level that really knows our potential for selfhood. And if we stay true to ourselves, and we can talk about that too, what does that mean, staying true to yourself? And follow the guidance or suggestions of the dream, which are very vague and symbolic. So it isn't a recipe, now do this, now do this. But it does give you a kind of general orientation as to where you might be going. And then you fill in the blanks with your life. At the end of the process, you can see what the dream knew all along. It's quite extraordinary.
Yeah, it's a bit of a roadmap spoken in symbols. But I want to get into this idea of being true to yourself. You know, that's a phrase. I research the digital culture and how people develop their sense of identity in the digital culture. And I was interviewing this one young blogger, and he said, yeah, being yourself is overrated on the internet. And I thought, that's so interesting. Being yourself is overrated. Okay. So I want to go back to this idea of being true to yourself. What do you mean when you say that?
Well, you can't get guidance for being true to yourself from the internet. That's for sure. Or from your social media groups. What's happening in the culture now with this digital age, as they're calling it, is on the one hand, opening up avenues for individual development and expression that were barely noticed before. I mean, now the doors are being thrown wide open, and the windows to just becoming pretty much whatever you think you want to be in the moment. But is that following being true to yourself? You know, when Jungians use the word self, it has a very special connotation. It isn't just an impulse, and it isn't ego directed. Ego is your I. You know, the ego says, I want, I think, I need, and those are true also. You know, I want to live a happy life. I want to have a good relationship. I want to get rich. I want to be famous. All the things the I wants. But the I is not the self. So if you're listening to the I, you're not being true to the self. The self is the center of the whole personality. Okay, and it's very elusive. It's very complex. It doesn't just tell you, give you straight directions in the form of desires or passions. It might signal you with synchronicities. You know, if you look back on your life and you see what were some of the most important turning points in your life, I guarantee you'll find that many of them, if not all of them, were accidental. For instance, how did I become a Jungian analyst, which has occupied my life since I was 25 years old? Okay, I'm now 79 years old. So a long time. How did I
Bravo, by the way. Bravo.
I never found my way to Jungian work except for a chance conversation on a Sunday afternoon in Washington, D.C. in 1968. I remember the day when a woman said to me, you know what? I think you would be interested in Jung. Why don't you look into that? And we were in the middle of a discussion about the Vietnam War, 1968. You know, it was a big year. So I went to the bookstore and I found a book, the only book by Jung that was available, Memories, Dreams, Reflections.
Mhm.
And I've never put it down.
Wow.
That
Wow.
book changed my life. Okay. And
Mhm.
I might have found it another time. I don't know, but it was the timing of it.
Mhm.
Pure accident, pure chance. And I've heard so many stories like that about people getting married, for instance, because they met somebody by chance on an airplane flight. You know, who knew? It isn't by deliberate, rational acts of, based on knowledge bases that we make our most important decisions. They're on hunches, they're on chance events. Now, what do you do with a chance event? I mean, it could just peter out into nothing. I could have read that book and dropped it, but that was followed by other synchronicities. So when I came back, I was on an internship in Washington. I came back to Yale. The first person I met coming back on campus told me they had just been to Zurich and they were studying at the Jung Institute. I said, "What's that?" You know, it was like that, one little thing after another. And that's, if you follow these hints, as Jung calls them, numinous experiences, synchronicities, they're hints from the self. That is being true to the self. It isn't, what would I like to do? I didn't even know what a Jungian analyst was. I'd never heard of such a thing. Didn't know there was such a profession. It isn't that I wanted to become a Jungian analyst. I thought this is an interesting topic, interesting set of ideas. And then one thing leads to another, and before you know it, you have a path. So when I think about being true to oneself, I think about paying attention to big dreams and synchronistic events. A synchronicity is a meaningful coincidence. Our life is full of them, full of coincidences. We don't make much meaning out of most of them. But if you have one and you follow up on it, and then that takes you another step, you're being true to the self. And it's a kind of mystical path. It's not a rational path. It's an irrational path. This being true to the self. So that's what I mean by being true to yourself. Being true to yourself isn't being true to your habitual way of life, being true to what you've been taught by your parents or your culture. It's keeping your ears and eyes open for surprising opportunities that just drop into your lap synchronistically, meaningfully, and you follow up on them. Most great inventions come like that. Most great ideas come like that. That's how culture develops. That's how individuals develop, by following those things. If you just follow the given path that's laid down for you by your family, by your culture, by your ego desires, you can live an okay life, but you aren't going to live a very creative life, and you aren't going to discover the greatest gifts that the self has to offer. Those come from the fringes. They come from Hermes, Mercurius, from the edges.
You'll never really know what your potential was
You
because
won't know. Exactly.
no, which, wow, that's a big price to pay for wanting to play it safe, right?
Yeah, it's a big thing.
And it reminds me of this quote that you bring up in your book, The Mystery of Transformation, is that, Jung was lecturing to a group of young medical students, and he was a little reluctant to kind of lay down the darker side of what it means to go through a midlife crisis or a big change. But he does it anyway. I'm going to quote this from your book. Okay. This is Jung speaking. A point exists at about the 35th year when things begin to change. It is the first moment of the shadow side of the self, of going down to death. It is clear that Dante found this point. When this turning point comes, people meet it in several ways. Some turn away from it, others plunge into it, and something important happens to yet others from the outside. So this made me think, a little bit like Joseph Campbell says, the hero hears the call.
Mm-hmm.
And in our own lives, at some point, the self, if it's not really living up to its potential, I'm interpreting you now, is the self hears a calling. A calling goes out, and we either hear it and rise to it, or we set it aside. And have you had patients come to you later, analysts come to you later in their lives when they ignored the calling and now they want to act on some of it? What do you have to say to them?
Well, it's never too late, working with clients, you always have to begin with exactly where they are and accept them where they are and what they have been, and then take it from there. So I follow Jung's advice. He says to the patient, I don't know what's good for you. I don't know what your path is. I have no idea. Let's look to your dreams. So no matter what your age, I would say that no matter what your life has been. I remember a woman coming to me when I was in Chicago for some sessions. She had taken some courses at the Jung Institute, and she wanted to work on her dreams a bit. And she was in her 60s. And she came with a lot of regrets about her life. She had been a bad mother. She had been a failed academic. She said she had been a terrible wife. Her husband had died recently. She felt very bad about her previous life. And so we worked on that a bit. But the main thing was, yes, you have to look at all that of the past, but what about the potential? What's still left? So we started looking at her dreams, and then also doing active imagination. Now that active imagination is something that Jung discovered in his midlife crisis period, and creating the Red Book, following what he called the spirit of the depths, not the spirit of the times. So you kind of leave the historical world and you go into the depths. Now you look at the unconscious and you work with images that come to you from the unconscious. So she picked up on some images from the unconscious and started working with them in active imagination. And it completely transformed her life. In her 70s now, okay? She discovered a figure who she related to as a kind of Mother Teresa figure. And they had conversations, and she got advice from this figure. She completely mended and repaired her relationships with her children. She had a couple of alienated children at that time. Gave them some money that they had coming to them, some inheritance. She went back to her church and started working with people in need, in the shelter and church that the church provided, and so on. And she really started being what Erickson called generativity, a generative person, out of this experience in active imagination, discovering the Mother Teresa within. She became like a Mother Teresa. Now, that happened to her in her later years, and it made all the difference in her life. She could let go of the regrets. She could repair what was repairable. You have to let the rest go anyway. And so, if people come with that kind of situation, I just say, well, let's see what's still possible. Let's look at the unconscious. Let's look for some dreams and work with them.
So, in a sense, our potential is always waiting for us.
It's always there, yes.
It's always there. What a brilliant note to end on, Murray. It's inspiring to talk to you. You've seen so much, you've written so much, you've worked with so many people and so many of their dreams. So I want, on behalf of everyone at the Institute, I want to thank you not only for today, but for all you've done for the Institute in Chicago. And your book, The Mystery of Transformation, we will make sure that we have a link to it so people can find it. And I really, it was such an honor today. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you, Patricia. And I would like to just send my greetings to all my friends at the Chicago Institute. I know so many of them not the new ones so much, but the ones I worked with in the training program until 2003. And we've kept up, some of us, in the meantime. And they're very deep and wonderful friendships.
I shall do so.
Okay. Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you.